No wonder kids today don't want to do certain jobs because all they hear is their parents or whoever talking about how they hate what they're doing. That's not right. We need to create workplaces where people go home happy so that they create happy families, and happy families create happy communities, and the happy community creates a happy world because we need a happy world.
Welcome to Stickology. My guest today is Garry Ridge, the former CEO and now Chairman Emeritus of WD-40, where he spent over 25 years transforming a simple blue and yellow can into the world's most beloved workplace culture. Under his leadership, WD-40 became famous for its tribe mentality and sky-high employee engagement scores, and a people-first philosophy rooted in servant leadership. As if running this amazing company wasn't enough, Gary's also the author of Helping People Win at Work and Any Dumbass Can Do It. And he has become one of the most influential voices in modern leadership. Today, he teaches leaders around the world how to build organizations where people feel safe and supported and empowered to do the best work of their lives. And I am beyond excited to learn from Garry today. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Hey, Stephen, it's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me along.
Well, I have so many questions for you, and we can take this conversation wherever you want to go, but maybe we could start at the beginning. Uh, I'm really curious for people who only know WD-40 as the blue and yellow can in their garage or their utility room. How do you describe the company that you built as the leader?
Well, as I talk about the company itself, we were in the memories business. We existed to create positive, lasting memories, solving problems in factories, homes, and workshops around the world. And those memories were also important to us with the people who went to work every day because we believed that going to work to a place where you make a contribution to something bigger than yourself, you learn something new, you're protected, and you're set free by a compelling set of values, and you go home happy, is really important because happy people build happy families build happy communities build a happy world. So we were fortunate to have a great product to stand on to do that, which was actually developed in 1953 in San Diego.
There's a lot to unpack there, and certainly a lot of beautiful stuff that I would like to believe most leaders should or are thinking about, but most are not. How do you take a company like this and attribute certainly such a big, lofty, but important goal to it?
Well, I think again it comes back to what is our real purpose, and the brand had great opportunities globally, and we had a great opportunity doing that to really make a positive difference in people's lives. And I learned a long time ago that if you can create a place where people really enjoy what they're doing, they actually do better work than if they don't enjoy what they're doing. And again, it came down to the fundamentals that people want to know and feel like they belong. People want to know that the work they do matters and it makes a difference. People want to be in an environment where they feel safe, and that's often referred to as psychological safety. And we have to change the role, and we talk about this a lot, of the leader from being called a manager to being called a coach and acting like a coach with one only objective, and that is to help those they have the privilege to lead step into a better version of themselves, both in competency wise and emotionally.
Let's maybe stay on the coach philosophy for a minute, because I think that's such an important one. One of the things you did at WD-40 was change the branding of managers to coaches, but you also changed the expectations, I believe, of managers as well. I'm curious, could you talk about the process of doing so and how that ultimately changed the outcome of your business?
I think not only with coaches, but if you call something something, that something does something. So, if you call someone a manager, they're going to try to, quote, manage, particularly if they've never been in that role before, because historically they look back and they think, well, who was my manager? And, I don't think that we want to manage people. We want to coach people. So we changed the role from being a manager to a coach. And a great coach is committed to helping the people they coach get an A. And that's something we talked about in the book that I wrote with Ken Blanchard. A great coach is brave. They don't protect their own comfort zone at the expense of someone else's growth. A great coach knows the game and what it takes to win, doesn't run onto the field and take the ball. You know, we've never seen a great coach of any team run onto the field and try to make the play. Although in leadership, managers micromanage all the time. Um, a great coach spends a lot of time on the sideline observing the play. They add value to the player with feedback on how to improve the play. They never, ever, ever, Stephen, go to the podium and pick up the prize. And we know that a lot of toxic leaders are always running to take the glory that someone else deserves. And most importantly, I think, or equally as important, they spend a lot of time in what I've labeled the stinky locker room. And the stinky locker room is being alongside your people, understanding your people. As the leader, your job is not to sit in some ivory tower. It's to get out there and really understand what's happening in the field with the people you have the privilege to lead.
I subscribe to all of that. Something that comes to mind that's a challenge for any business is when you think of, I'm going to go back to the vernacular of managers. You take high performers and you often put them into a managerial role. Uh, but it's rare that managers are really taught how to be managers. They might have been really good at what they did, but that doesn't mean that they're really good at helping others be really good at what they do. So how do you, let's move back to coach. How do you coach the coach to be a great coach?
You clearly define what their role is, and then you act it within the organization. And, I think not only do people not get trained to be managers, the sad thing is they don't get trained to be leaders. There's not a lot of leadership development work that goes on before someone's given that very, 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 very important role of leading. And if I go back to my book for a minute, it's really something that um, it helps describe. People have asked me, why did I call my book "Any Dumb Ass Can Do It"? And let me share with you, Stephen, that the word ass, A-S-S, in this case is not referring to someone's bottom or their posterior. It's really talking about a donkey. And donkeys get a bad rap. People think they're just stubborn or slow, but let me tell you the truth. Donkeys are steady. They keep going after others give up. They're loyal companions. You can count on them when the road gets rough. They're practical, not flashy. They know how to conserve energy and get the job done. And while they might not always rush into things, Stephen, that caution often keeps them safe. So when I say any dumbass can do it, what I really mean is you don't have to be brilliant to be a great leader. You just need a bit of courage, a lot of care, and the humility to keep learning. Because like the donkey, leadership isn't about showing off. It's about carrying the load, sticking with the journey, and helping others get to where they need to go.
You also probably need a environment that's not focused on quarterly results, right? Because ultimately, you can't build a successful long-term vision business, in my opinion, if you're looking quarter to quarter. Right?
That's so true. I mean, you have to have markers of success. But, if you are going to make decisions based on some quarterly result, you're not going to make the longer term decisions. So, when I had the privilege to lead the company, we didn't give quarterly guidance, and we're a public company. And I got a bit of, pressure around that from time to time. But I remember clearly one time I was talking with, at that time, one of our very large institutional investors. And I said to the portfolio manager, I said, I'm not smart enough to be able to lead a business in 90-day intervals. And he said, I'm glad you're not dumb enough to try. So certainly you need to have a clearly defined path of growth. You have to have, a strategic plan that people understand and can nod and say, yes, that has sense around it. But more importantly, you have to have high will of the people. And high will of the people is how engaged are your people around going to work every day and executing against that plan.
Earlier in your career, Gary, I would like to believe you came into the workforce thinking this way, but I imagine at some point maybe it clicked. Can you talk about, what were some of the things early on that made you start to think this way?
Yeah, there was an absolute turning point, and it was, I joined WD-40 in 1987 in Australia. I'd actually been with the company 35 years, and in 1994 I was invited to move to the United States to help head up our global expansion program. And in 1997, the CEO retired, and for my sins, I got to was given the privilege of leading. And our goal was to take the blue and yellow can with the little red top to the world. The brand was pretty well established in the US, but there were lots of opportunities outside of the United States that we'd identified. We knew how to do that from a marketing point of view, but what kept going through my head was, how do you build a culture where whatever time it is, wherever it is, on any day, people feel safe to make decisions and move forward without doing what I call, Stephen, quacking up the hierarchy. And I didn't know how to do that, but it was going through my head. And I was traveling, it was 1998-ish, and I was traveling on a Qantas 747 from Los Angeles to Sydney. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, 38,000 feet, somewhere over the South Pacific Ocean. And as you do when you travel like that, or at least I do, I take stuff to read, right? And I was reading something, and it's a quote that was attributed apparently to the Dalai Lama, which said, our purpose in life is to make people happy. If we can't make them happy, at least don't hurt them. And then I read something else soon after from Aristotle, who was born in 384 BC, and that was, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work. And I thought, well, duh, if you really like what you're doing, you're going to do it better. I still didn't know how to do it. Anyhow, I got back to San Diego after my trip to Australia, and I was reading something in the local paper, and I read about a program, a master's degree, a fully fledged master's degree at the University of San Diego, and it was developed by Dr. Ken Blanchard and the university, and it was focusing more on the leadership aspects. So I thought, I'm going to go to this information session. So I went to the information session, and Ken Blanchard was speaking, and I had never met Ken up until this day. And Ken said, most leadership programs get people in the head. We got to start thinking about getting people in the heart. And I went, wow. I enrolled immediately in that program. So now I was the CEO of a US public company already, and this kid's going back to school. So for the next 2 years, I went to school every month, and I learned the power of servant leadership. Now, it was in the first class that I really learned who I didn't want to be. The first class was really focused on who are you as the leader, and I was very clearly what they call a turbo D: be brief, be bright, and be gone. I had many of the attributes of this person that I talk about, which is Alec, the soul-sucking CEO, and they were identified, and I said, gee whiz, I have to change this. And that was the start where I decided I was not going to be this soul-sucking CEO. I was going to be someone who was more of a servant leader.
I love that story because one of the things you talked about earlier is humbleness, right? And I think that how many CEOs take the time to say, I have something to learn here, right? And great leaders uh, have the skills of a black belt, but have the open-mindedness of a white belt, and really want to continue to grow, right? And so it seems like you really fit that description quite well at that point in your career. Uh,
Well, when we talked about tribes at the company too, the number one responsibility of a tribal leader is to be a learner and a teacher. And we were very, very clear about that. And, we invested a lot of our time and talent in learning. We wanted to be a forever learning organization. And, you think about it, if you're the leader of a tribe, If you're not continually learning and then continually teaching your tribe members new skills, the tribe will go extinct. So that was one of the aspects of being a tribe was the leader, again, naming the leader as a learner and a teacher. And I'd often ask, what have you learned today and what have you taught today? Because I thought that was really important.
So I love the concept of the tribe. It drives particular behaviors. How was that introduced at WD-40 and how was it received over time?
Well, the main reason I introduced it was one of the key attributes of building an effective and strong culture is belonging. People, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy to self-actualization, the first two rungs are kind of, am I safe and can I survive? And the third one is love and belonging. And, you don't belong on a team over time. You play on a team situationally, but I looked for something that was, unifying, and I landed on this aspect or this thing about tribes. Now, let me be clear, it was not a reflection of any indigenous group. It was going back to the beginning of mankind. Ugg the caveman was part of a tribe. And then I did some research into, so what were the things that kept tribes together over time? And I interviewed tribal leaders in Fiji and other places, and and I learned that the number one thing was learning and teaching. So once I was able to put together the model and explain and share with the people in the organization, number one, you need to belong to something that is meaningful. So the tribal attributes were learning and teaching, values, belonging, future focus, specialized skills, warriors, and celebration. And as we rolled it out, people really did embrace it because they could say, I belong here, and here's why. So we had shared goals, we had genuine care, we had trust, and all of that, was something that really fueled the belonging in the organization.
One of the things I heard you talk about today, and I've certainly heard you talk about in the past, is uh, the importance of learning moments. And personally, I love that, having spent a good deal of my career in learning and development and career development. How do you formalize that so it's not just a poster on the wall?
What's the definition of a learning moment? Our definition, my definition, is a learning moment is a positive or negative outcome of any situation that needs to be openly and freely shared to benefit all people. Why did we, develop the learning moment philosophy? Well, one of, if not the biggest disablers in life and organizations is fear. And, I haven't heard many people running down corridors of organizations screaming out, I failed. And what people tend to do is they hide the failure because they're ashamed, because people don't recognize the failure as a gift. And we wanted to recognize both positive outcomes and negative outcomes as gifts. And so that's why we said we don't make mistakes around here. We have learning moments. And if you go back to the beginning of WD-40, the other reason it was something that could be meaningful described was back in 1953 in San Diego, there was a fledgling company called Rocket Chemical Company. And Rocket Chemical Company was in the aviation business around products, supplying aviation products, chemicals. And there was a problem with condensation and corrosion in the umbilical cord of the Atlas space rocket. So the chemists got together and started to mix up solutions. Formula 1 didn't work, 5 didn't work, 15 didn't work, 25 didn't work, 30 didn't work, 35 didn't work. You know where I'm going here, 36,
I'm going to
37,
assume 40 did, maybe.
40, 40 work. So it stands for WD water displacement 40th formula. So the company was birthed, if you will, or was born after 39 learning moments. So it was also a way of being able to validate the power of the learning moment. Are we one learning moment away from something absolutely magnificent?
So there's a quote that Thomas Edison has been attributed to Thomas Edison, talking about how he didn't fail 999 times in building a light bulb that worked, but he learned 999 times how not to build a light bulb.
There you
And it
go.
seems very similar, right?
Absolutely.
Ultimately, uh, and so if only every company would take that philosophy, is thinking about how can we learn from our mistakes and make ourselves a better organization as a result, right? I love the image of someone running down a hall yelling, "I screwed up," right? Because ultimately we're all people and we all screw up. But people often are more shy about that, right? And the reality is, if you feel confident to be able to own up to when something didn't go right, you could probably leverage your teammates, your tribe, to help make it right going forward. In circumstances where someone screwed up in your organization, how did you make that a cultural win?
A number of times that happened in marketing execution. We would execute a particular marketing plan with, or a marketing program with a particular goal in mind, and it kind of didn't turn out the way we wanted. Now, the 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 real treasure there is to go back as we did and say, okay, let's do an after action review of why this didn't work out, instead of what happens in some organizations. They kind of flower up the result and make out that it was okay. So, those were one areas. And there were others where, we'd try something in a formulation and it didn't work. And okay, we may have spent or invested substantially in that. And it's better to say, well, okay, let's take a step back. What do we need to do? How do we learn from it? How do we make sure that we socialize that learning so everybody knows about it? Because we don't necessarily want people to have the same learning moments. So they're big learning moments, little learning moments, but the real gold in this is to have that in the organization where you say, it didn't quite work out the way we wanted. Here's my learning moment. Or, yay, this was really successful. I need to make sure we socialize this so that others can take advantage of it.
Gary, one of the things that I glossed over is the fact that WD-40 under your leadership grew tremendously. And maybe we can talk a little about some of those numbers. But I want to focus on that just for a moment, because sometimes people, I think, have the mindset of, I can build a business that has economic value, or I can build a business that has human value. But the reality is, you can build a business that has both those in harmony. And I'm hoping that you can talk about not just the good feel, the positive culture that you built, but also the impact that it's had on your business, and how you might attribute the two.
Oh, absolutely. Simply, profit is the applause of people doing good work. That's the end result. And I have a theory around this, is that, we can write a really, really good strategic plan. Take it to some smart professor. 70 out of 100 for your strategic plan. Yay! But if only 30% of your people are going to work every day and passionately executing against that strategic plan, you get a result of 30 times whatever. But if 80% of your people are going to work every day and passionately executing against that strategic plan, you get a much better result than the one before. So it's the will of the people times strategy equals success. And that's what happened at our organization. WD-40 is a great brand. It's not sexy, and it's what we do. But yeah, we took the market cap of the company from 300 or so million to 3 billion. We 7x the revenue. We took the brand to 176 countries around the world. When I was given the privilege to lead the company, 70% of the business was in the US. When I left, 70% of the business was outside the US, and we'd grown substantially. You know, it's not about having just a nice place. It's, how do you create an environment where the environment motivates the people to do work much, much in advance of if you've got a terrible environment. So, yeah. A lot of people say, Stephen, this is the soft stuff. This is not soft. This is hard. And if it was soft, everybody would do it. But I think we should be ashamed that today, and I just read some updates on this morning, today in the United States alone, about 70% of people who are going to work are either disengaged or actively disengaged. So two terrible things are happening there. Number one is they're not maximizing the opportunity of the operations they're in. But even sadder than that, they're going home unhappy. And they're sitting around dinner tables with kids and family members griping and moaning about how they hate their job and how it's negatively impacting their life. No wonder kids today don't want to do certain jobs because all they hear is their parents or whoever talking about how they hate what they're doing. That's not right. We need to create people's workplaces where people go home happy so that they create happy families, and happy families create happy communities, and the happy community creates a happy world, because we need a happy world.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I think that most businesses and most leaders are not thinking about that big picture. They're thinking about their business. They're thinking about their quarter. They're not thinking about their contribution to society. So I love that connection because ultimately, that's critical. And every business, if they took that stance, we'd be living in a much happier place. Um,
Businesses touch more people every day than anything else.
yep, yep. There is another formula that I've heard you talk about. I think I heard you and Simon Sinek talk about this, which was culture equals value plus behavior times consistency. And I wanted to kind of focus on that a little bit because ultimately, the more that you can get everyone's head around it, you can get everyone doing it, and you can get everyone doing it regularly. You're going to change the outcome of your business. You're going to create change, and not just living in a feel good place, right? You're going to have much better performance. You talk about some of the best places to work charts, and they say those companies have 1/3 the turnover. They have 8 times more revenue per employee. They have 3.5 times the performance of the S&P. I mean, these are hard numbers that are incredibly valuable, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true, you can't sprinkle fairy dust over an organization and change the culture. I have a friend of mine, his name's Charlie Maloof. He owns an organization out in Charlotte called Broad River Retail. They run Ashley Furniture Stores. And he says, culture is not a microwavable event. It takes a crockpot approach. And that is so true. And that's what my formula is. It's culture equals values. Do you have a set of values in your organization that are there to protect people and set them free? Are you, as the leader, make you brave enough to ensure that the behavior in the organization is not toxic, it's supportive, you're being a coach, and are you doing that consistently? And if you do, I will guarantee you that you will over time get the types of employee engagement numbers. 93% engagement we had. 98% of the people say they love to tell people they work at the company. And 97% say that they respect their coach. Now, if you think about that, most people leave organizations because they hate their boss. And we put the word respect in, and we said, why do you respect your coach? And they said, it's because the coach is here to help me win. So, and I know the statistics are clear. Organizations with crappy cultures have the highest cost of employees, the highest turnover, because you can pay people to hate you, but it's not sustainable.
Well, everyone has a price, right? Ultimately, I'm curious. First of all, the stats that you just talked about are off the charts, and there are very few companies that can claim similar numbers. And maybe you could talk even a little bit about. I've heard you talk about during the pandemic, the numbers remained where they were, and I'm curious what you learned about your people and your culture as a result.
Yeah, well, it was really a what I would call a career mic drop for me. The learning around the pandemic. It was January 2021. We'd been in this for a year nearly now. As we'll all remember, there was no real sign of, that white light that we were looking for. We were all living day to day and hoping for the best. And, we'd been operating reasonably well. but we hadn't had a lot of the things in place that had kept us together, which were connection and whatever. We were doing it virtually like everyone else, and we had to learn very quickly how to be good at being virtual. So I asked our folks to go out and do a pulse survey and just check the number to see that we weren't draining our cultural equity, and we did that. And as you shared, the numbers came back, and they were pretty much in line with the survey we'd done in March, just before COVID started, except for one number. And the statement was, I am excited about my place in the company's future. And it came back that 97% of our people globally were excited about their place in the company's future. And I said that number cannot be correct. There has to be some sort of error in the number. Go back and check it. And they went back and checked and said, no, it's right. I said, okay, there's something here. We've got to know why. So we went back and we dug into why is that number so high? And it was a mic drop moment. The reply we got is, I feel safe. If I need to be anywhere now, I want to be right here, right now, because we're living our just cause as a group of people who come together and protect and feed each other, because that was the just cause of our tribe, was a group of people that come together to protect and feed each other. And I said, that's it. We've proven it. If we can do that in this environment, that's it. It's done.
So this goes back to what you said. It's the soft stuff is hard, but look how much it pays off, right? What CEO wouldn't want that to be the response of their entire tribe, their entire community, right?
I would guess in today's environment, if you ask that question in a lot of companies, you would get a very low score. If, but here we were in January 2021, and it's like, whoa.
Garry, what did you learn about leading remote or hybrid teams back then? And as companies are bringing people back to the office today, what advice do you have for keeping their employees' needs in mind?
Well, I think number one is what we learned was we had to be deliberate and consistent. And when COVID broke, within about a week, we got together, the leadership team got together, and we said, all right, we've got to have three simple goals. What are they? And the number one goal was the safety and the well-being of our people. Number two was to service our customers where we could, when we could, the best we could. And the third one was to protect the underbody of the business so we could thrive when this was over. And we did everything to do that. And we had a lot of fun in a lot of cases. We were doing online cooking classes. We had online magicians come in. We had people like my friend Chester Elton, who wrote Leading with Gratitude. He and Adrian came and did a couple of workshops on gratitude. So we were continually feeding the positive and trying to keep up on that. So we learned a lot. But the core of it was we learned that we needed to stay connected. And the thing that worries me a lot today is we were talking wrongly about coming back to work. We don't want people to come back to work because we don't trust them. We want people to come back to be connected because we are human beings. We need human connection. You put someone in solitary confinement, they go crazy. So, and one of the things that was becoming obvious to me during COVID is how people took positions a lot quicker on subjects than when we were coming together because they weren't getting the benefit of, hey, Stephen, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? It was, here's the Zoom screen. Okay. Were they asking themselves the question of why do I believe what I believe? So I think great leaders now have got to create a scenario where Stephen's running out the door this morning. He gives his husband, wife, or significant other a high five and says, I am so excited to go to fill in the blank today because we are going to fill in the blank. And it's not going into the office to sit behind a computer screen. It's how we're going to use that time together to strategize, to energize, to learn, and be part of something bigger than ourselves.
I think it all starts with building that culture, though, that makes people feel that way, right? Because you hear all these organizations that I think actually are bringing people back to the office because of that lack of trust, or because they think that you know butts in the seats are going to be more productive. But ultimately, I love what you're talking about. It comes down to that human connection, and when and as much as I'm enjoying this conversation, looking at you on my screen, boy, would I rather be sitting next to you, in the company cafeteria, or in a breakout room, having a conversation where I can read your body language a lot more, and we can be a
Yeah,
lot more collaborative with one another. Yeah.
absolutely. I agree with you totally. It's so true. So, we'll get to a point eventually, and it's also feeding into this disease that's running around, which is loneliness. People are lonely. They need each other. You know, I wanted our organization to be a place where people escape to, not escaped from. And where they, no matter what was going on in their life outside them, they knew they were loved and wanted and meaningful when they came to, be in the organization.
Well, I will tell you that I'm the father of three, and I've gone 5 years back and thinking about where my children were, and working in my house for a solid year. I wanted to escape to someplace.
Yeah.
um,
I got a bit
can
of
you?
cabin fever myself, I must tell you.
I think we all did. We all
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
So the pandemic's probably just as good example of a tough time as any. But I'm curious. Maybe thinking about other tough times. Were there times when you made people first decisions that might have looked risky on a spreadsheet, but you quickly knew that this is the right thing to do because of this bigger picture we're talking about?
Yeah, 2008, 2009 was a great example when we were going through, quote, the great financial global crisis, and the world was kind of coming to an end business-wise, and we said, we're not going to lay anybody off. And I said, no way. I said, it's better that all of us suffer a little than a few of us suffer a lot. And I went out to the organization and said, nobody's getting laid off. However, we've got to work together to ensure that we protect our organization as best we can, and we got creative around that. But I got some serious pushback around that. Well, you better prepare us. I said, well, I am preparing us. I am not going to sacrifice the knowledge and the expertise that we've built in this company. In fact, we actually turned up the volume on learning and teaching that year. We did more people development that year than ever. Um, and as and in that year, we kind of went sideways as a business. We didn't suffer too much. The next year, as people started to have to repopulate and reposition, we came out so strong. We had the best year in the company's history, and so you know that was the end. And it's interesting how that event really made people feel safe in COVID, because in my kind of farewell tour when I was traveling around the world, visiting our offices in my last year as CEO, many people came up to me and said, we trusted what the company would do in 2021 because of what you did in 2008 or 9. And a lot of people were still there because they believed us. So I think that's why they felt safe.
Well, that's a tribute to you and a tribute to some of the decisions you clearly made. Uh, we've talked a little about culture. We've talked certainly about coaching. We've talked about a number of things. I want to talk about servant leadership, and
Hmm.
I think it certainly is related to coaching. But if you even move further up the ladder, if you will, I think that there's a real important role that servant leadership can play. I know this is something that you focus on a lot. I was hoping maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I learned a lot of that, of course, from um, my mentor and my dear friend, Dr. Ken Blanchard. And Ken says saying you're a servant leader is a good start, but it's your behavior that makes it real for the people. So, let's not get caught up in this word servant leadership. Let's think about what it really means. And what it means is that you, as the leader, are there to best serve those you have the privilege to lead to help them develop. And servant leaders love and involve their people. They're expected to be competent. You know, as a servant leader's got to be a continual learner. They're connected. They spend a lot of time in the stinky locker room. They love learning moments. They have a heart of gold, but they also have a backbone of steel because people have to know that in tough times they will make tough decisions if need be. You know, they're champions of hope. They know micromanagement is not scalable. They do what they say they're going to do, and they're always treasuring the gift of feedback, which is quite the opposite to the servant leader, which is this person, which is Alec, the soul-sucking CEO. And Alec, the soul-sucking CEO's, his ego or her ego, it could be Alice, eats their empathy instead of their empathy eating their ego. They're a micromanager. They think they're corporate royalty. They love a fear-based culture. They're a master of control. They're a know-it-all. They have all the answers, even the wrong ones. They don't value learning. They hate feedback, and they don't keep their commitments. So there's the yin and the yang, as you might say, of the difference between the servant leader who is really empathetic towards the people they lead and not necessarily, driven by the me.
I love that. And I wish that more leaders could have that mindset. And some, I think, when their eyes are opened up to the possibility and the impact that they can have, no doubt they a light bulb goes on. And some have a very different philosophy. Decisions are made at the top and people follow. I'm curious. I know that today you're doing a lot of consulting. You're working with a lot of leaders. Uh, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about some of the mindsets of the people that you're working with, and how you navigate helping people kind of really explore the possibilities and the impact that they can have as servant leaders.
Well, one of the things I've learned in the coaching work that I do now, and I coach CEOs and C-level leaders, is most of them don't get up every day and take the pledge that I am going to be a soul-sucking leader today. They're just not aware of how their behavior impacts others. And once they become aware of, hey, maybe I'm not as good a listener as I should be, or maybe I'm more micromanaging than I should be, and they intentionally start to work on changing that, they become the leader that they really want to be. So I think, there are certainly a group of leaders that will not change. They're the they're wired a certain way, and we've all met them. But there are, I think, a big group of people out there, a big group of leaders out there who really do want to be better, but aren't aware of why they're not. So, the first thing is, are you aware of who you are as a leader? And that was my big aha back in, the year 1999, 2000, where it was like, I don't want to be that person. In fact, I have a little notebook, I've had these types of notebooks forever that you carry around, right? And I've had a little placard on it for years, and I still have it now. And this little placard says, am I being the person I want to be right now? And then it says, who is that person? And it says, I want to be grateful, caring, empathetic, reasonable, a listener, fact-based. I want to have a balanced opinion. I want to be curious. I want to be a learner, and I want to throw sunshine, not a shadow. Why do I need that? Because I'm a dumbass. I really have to keep reminding myself, because the world impacts us. We're just these basic human beings bumbling our way down this pathway of life. And the world grabs hold of us and takes us into the bushes, and it's ego and greed and, short-term thinking and all this stuff. And we've got to say, I don't want to be here. You have to be aware that that's where you've gone, but you've got to get back on that road again, because if you don't get on that path, you'll never get to the destination. So I often say we have no right to take our leftovers to people, and we have to refill ourselves and take our fullness to people. But we have to be okay reminding ourselves we have to do it, because it's easy not to be.
Well, I think the last thing anyone would call you is a dumbass, because quite honestly, there's a lot of brilliance here. A lot of
A
brilliance.
dumbass is good. Some
I know, but people don't think of it that way. But yes, I understand the way you're defining it.
I'm changing the paradigm here.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, in more than one way. Um, you've received a CEO of the Year Lifetime Achievement Award. If you kind of think about that type of recognition, what are some of the things that you're proudest of in that role?
I could care less about the awards. What I'm proud of is seeing the people that I've had the opportunity to maybe, touch or be with go on to do great things. It's really nice to be recognized, no doubt, and I respect it and I thank those that have done that. But it's not about the public rewards. It's about, you know, seeing people there's so many stories in the organization. I'll share one with you. When we opened our China operation many years ago, I transferred the managing director of our Australian operation to Shanghai to kind of be the guard of starting the whole operation. And there was a lady, our first employee there. Her name is Grace, and I think this is 17 years ago. And she started as kind of an admin for the guy who was setting it up. And Grace was ambitious and wanted to learn, and she moved into HR, and from there she wanted to learn about supply chain, so we sponsored her, and she went to the University of Shanghai and did a degree in supply chain management, and then she was managing our supply chain in China and Asia, and she really loved that, but she wanted to do more. And anyhow, fast forward, she became the general manager of our China operation and still is. And we've got, I don't know how many people there now and millions of dollars worth of business. And it's because she wanted to, and we were able to support her, that she went from being an administrative assistant to now the general manager of one of the biggest opportunity markets in the world. So, and there's so many stories like that in the organization, and those are the awards that I really like.
That is an award. That's a huge award. They say that we as people, we want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be valued. And it seems to me that all three of those were accomplished with her, right? That's a beautiful story. Um, Garry, before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you this. If a young leader came to you today, someone who's dreaming of building an extraordinary organization, what's one piece of advice or what are multiple pieces of advice you'd give them to get it right from day one?
Uh, get comfortable with the three most important words. I don't know. Be a learner, a curious learner forever. And it's not about you. It's about how you help those around you step into the best version of their personal self. Those are probably the three things. And remember, life's a gift. Don't send it back unwrapped.
I love every single part of that. That's really inspiring. This entire conversation has been really inspiring. As I think about my own career, and all the things I've read and heard you say, they're a playbook for how I want to run my own organization and certainly the mark that I want to leave on society. So thank you for teaching me today. Thank you for inspiring me today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for doing what you do and for your podcast, because that's sharing with others that, we can make a difference in the world. My purpose is I help leaders build cultures of belonging where love, forgiveness, and learning inspire a happier, more connected world. That's why I wake up every day.
That was a really inspiring conversation with Garry Ridge, mostly because the things that he speaks about are near and dear to my heart. So here are my three takeaways. Number one, stop managing and start coaching. A leader's job is to support their team members and to stay out of the way. Number two, failure is a gift. We don't make mistakes, we have learning moments. We have to remove the fear of failure and encourage everyone to openly share their mistakes and their successes. And number three, culture equals values plus behavior times consistency. That's a mouthful. If you want a great culture, make sure your organization has a set of values to protect your people and set them free. Make sure your leaders ensure that their behavior of the organization is supportive, not toxic. And make sure your people are being coached consistently. Garry talked about the importance of living servant leadership every single day. So your people feel safe and they feel connected and they feel committed when the times are tough. Personally, I subscribe to all of this. And I have reminders all over my desk to make sure that I put these words into action. I hope this conversation was as inspiring for you as it was for me.